Spring is fast approaching, fellas, and that's some good news for a lot of us. And the reason why is because, well, we can start breaking out some of our warmer weather fragrances. And honestly, spring is one of my favorite times of year. Just one, for that reason that I can start reaching for some of my fresher fragrances, but also just because that means we're getting closer to summer, which is my all-time favorite time of the year. I'm not big on winter. I'm not big on cold weather. I like the snow. I don't like the cold that goes along with it. So I am always excited when spring starts to roll around. We start getting some heat again, because that just means we're one step closer to summer, where you can do a whole bunch of other fun stuff rather than freezing your ass off every time you go outside. Now, of course, I am going to be putting out my top 10 spring fragrances videos here soon, and I'm probably going to do a spring starting lineup video before that, and then after that, following will be my top 10 spring designer fragrances, and maybe I'll do a separate niche video as well if anyone's interested in that. So those videos will be coming here pretty soon. I would like to record them outside, so I want to wait till it gets a little bit warmer. But what I wanted to do today was go over how to pick out a great spring fragrance, because I don't really see anyone talk about what to actually specifically look for when picking out spring fragrances, when picking out summer fragrances. All of us give you our lists, which is awesome. I love giving you my list because it's fun for me to share with you what I wear. But I want to give you some tips and tricks and really just things that I personally look for when it comes to picking out spring fragrances. And of course, I'll probably do this on summer fragrances, fall, winter, as well as we get back into those seasons. And this, I feel like, is going to be really, really helpful for my beginners out there, because when I first started, I remember this very clearly, I had no idea what made a fragrance a summer fragrance or a spring fragrance. I was completely clueless. I was so confused, and I didn't know where to start. So hopefully this video will help some of you guys out if you don't understand what to look for and what makes fragrances a spring fragrance. This should help you, and also even people who already know about this stuff, it'll kind of give you an idea of what I personally look for, and maybe you can apply that to your fragrance shopping as well. Now let me know down in the comments what makes a good spring fragrance to you. Let me know your list and what you look for. And of course, I do appreciate you hitting the subscribe button, turning on post notifications, and liking the video. I hope you're ready. I am. Let's get into it. So the first thing I look for in a spring fragrance is I want a fragrance that's going to be semi-fresh and semi-sweet. So I'm looking for a mixture here. And I talk about that on the channel all the time, not so much in looking for a spring fragrance, but more in terms of mass appeal. You've probably heard me say this dozens of times now. The fragrances that tend to do the best in compliments are fragrances that are a little bit fresh and a little bit sweet. And the reason why is because you have typically two crowds: people who like fresh fragrances, people who like sweet fragrances. And when you combine them together, then you combine those crowds together, and those people are going to be meshing together, and more or not, it's going to be a numbers game here, and you're just going to find that you'll get more positive feedback with fragrances like that. That's kind of off topic, but you have heard me talk about that before, and I look for that in a spring fragrance, and the reason why is because we aren't into the blazing hot temperatures yet, right? It's not 80, 90 degrees and sunny and everything like that every day. It can still be a little bit cold. It could be 55, 60, maybe 65 degrees, sometimes, even 50, 45 degrees, whatever. In spring, the temperatures vary a lot. So what I look for, one of the things is a fragrance that's a little bit fresh for days where maybe it's a little bit warmer, but also a little bit sweet on days where it may be a little bit cooler. When you mix those two together, you get fragrances that are pretty versatile and that hold up in those kind of wishy-washy temperatures. The second thing I look for in a spring fragrance typically is something green smelling, right? And that makes sense because when it comes to springtime, the grass is going to be coming back to life. Leaves are going to start to coming back on the trees at some point. The flowers are going to start to, everything like that. So I look for something a little bit green to kind of go along with what's going to be happening out in nature. And I also look for something slightly floral sometimes. And I'm not the biggest fan of florals in men's fragrances. I do like it to some extent, like in Amouage Reflection Man. That is a men's floral fragrance that I absolutely love. That's a great, great fragrance. One of the best men's florals in my opinion. So I do like it to some extent, but there or some other fragrances where floral components are used that I'm not the biggest fan of. So in my spring fragrances, I definitely want it to be something kind of green smelling, right? It's very fitting, and typically with a little bit of a floral touch as well, although it doesn't have to be. The third thing that I'll look for in a spring fragrance is I'll want something usually with a fair amount of depth to it. And again, this kind of goes back to my first point here. Since we are still going to be in some cooler temperatures and things like that, I will want something that still has some body to it, because once you get into straight up summer fragrances, a lot of them are going to be consisting of mostly top notes, maybe some mid notes in there, probably some base notes from some synthetics and stuff like that, but generally, a lot of the summer citrus fragrances are going to be top notes, right? There's not a whole lot of depth to them, which is fine for a summer fragrance. That's what you want, but for spring, I want some depth to my fragrances still, just because we aren't fully into the super blazing heat yet. We still have some cool weather. We still have some cool breeze, some wind. It's not fully summer yet. So I do want something that will still hold up and will still have some body to it, which is nice because it kind of can ease you out from wearing these winter fragrances that have a lot of depth and a lot of strength to kind of something that is a little bit in between. That way you're not going from, something like Spice Bomb Extreme to Dior Homme Cologne, right? Two completely opposite ends of the spectrum here. You kind of ease your way out of it. That's typically what I look for in spring fragrances. It just kind of gets you warmed up. The fourth thing I'll look for in my spring fragrances is I want something with decent performance. And again, this kind of goes back to what I've been talking about here. When it's a little bit cold, I want good performance so that it will project out and that it will last. Because here's the thing with summer fragrances, typically they don't perform the best, but what's nice is when you have all of that heat coming down, that tends to help open them up and they project a lot more. So you can typically go with lighter projecting fragrances, and if you wear them in the summer in the heat, they're going to project a lot. Whereas again, with spring, we're just getting into it here, especially early spring, you're not going to have necessarily all that heat coming down to help your fragrance project. So I still do want to pick something that is going to have decent projection and I don't have to rely on the sun and the heat to get it to do so. That's just kind of one of those things that I personally like to look for. Obviously, you don't have to do any of this stuff. It just kind of is personal preference, but once you get a certain amount of fragrances built up, you can be a little bit more picky with what you're looking for, and that's just kind of one of the things I like. I still want something with some body, with some performance, with some punch, so that it'll still cut through the air. The fifth thing that I look for in my spring fragrances is I want something that doesn't need the heat to develop. So this is one where you kind of want to be careful with, because you may be super excited and you want to jump into your summer fragrances right away, which trust me, I understand, I want to do the same thing. But you can't really go to a straight up citrus dominated fragrance if it's still kind of cold out. I mean, obviously you can. There's no one saying you can't. There's no one saying it's not going to work or smell good, but it's not going to have the same effect as if you're wearing it in the heat. So another example that I talked about earlier, Dior Homme Cologne. That is a fragrance that, in my opinion, really needs heat to open up and develop. You can wear it in the winter. You can wear it when it's cold outside, and it still smells fantastic. But it's a completely different experience when you wear it out in the summer heat, when it's 80 plus degrees outside, the sun shining. That's when it really starts to develop. It really starts to spread its wings, and you'll notice that it almost turns into a completely different scent. On my skin in the high heat, it turns a little bit more sweet than it already does. You hear people talk about that iced sweet lemonade all the time, which does have that effect. But even when you have more heat on it, it's kind of amplified and it turns a little bit more sweet. Overall, it kind of gets a little bit more interesting to me. It almost smells like it has a bit more going on than it does once you let it open up like that, which is really, really nice. So again, here in spring, you don't want to go that far yet. Because that fragrance needs heat to get it to that point. And if you're wearing it in spring, it's not fully going to get there. Of course, it is still going to work, but I would save that for summer. So I do look for something that doesn't need a bunch of heat to let it fully open up and develop and smell like how it's supposed to. So, again, with winter fragrances, they don't need really any heat externally to get it there. Obviously, your body heat does help it, but it doesn't need heat from the outdoors or from the sun to do so. So you can kind of choose something that's, again, a little bit fresh, a little bit sweet, has that depth in the base with some citrus or fresher top notes, that sort of thing is going to work really well, and it's not going to need that much heat to fully open up and smell fantastic. And one of the last things I look for when it comes to picking out a spring fragrance is I typically want something with a little bit of a soapy quality to it. And typically for me in summertime, I don't really like soapy fragrances all that much because that soapiness in the heat can be a little bit too much. I will wear them from time to time, but it's not my main thing. For me, soapy fragrances I think are fantastic for spring, and then I leave the straight up citrus bomb fragrances for summer. So, for example, Prada L'Homme. Everyone knows Prada L'Homme. That's an iris, soapy, clean fragrance, and that would be perfect for springtime. It's got that nice, clean, soapy quality. It's got some depth from the iris note. It's got, a little bit of a freshness. It's got a whole bunch going on, that type of thing. The epitome of a spring fragrance. And other fragrances that have a soapy quality, Dior Homme Eau, which smells kind of similar to Prada L'Homme, that has a soapy quality. There's a bunch of other ones out there that also smell soapy, I guess. There's a ton of them out there. So that's another thing that I'll typically look for in my spring fragrances because that's really about when I want to wear them the most. I can wear them in summer. I don't really like to as much. I like to wear other things. I could wear them in winter. I don't feel they do as well in winter because it's so cold. So spring and probably fall is the time that I'm going to be wearing these soapy fragrances the most to kind of get the most out of them for the weather conditions. So I think that works really, really well. Soapy, clean, fresh fragrances for springtime because it's got a little bit of depth, a little bit of a sweetness with, a counterbalancing freshness, and that tends to work really well. So that's it for me. That was 6 things that I look for when picking out the perfect spring fragrance. That's just kind of my list here. That's kind of what I look through, when I'm putting my spring list together or when I'm just deciding what I wear in the spring. That's kind of the things I'll run through in my head as I'm doing that. So hopefully this helps out some beginners. Again, I know it can be intimidating when you're trying to figure out, when do I wear certain fragrances? Honestly, it's one of those things that just comes with practice at the end of the day. The more fragrances you smell, the more you'll get an understanding of how, they smell appropriate for certain seasons. So again, make sure you let me know down in the comments what you look for when picking out the perfect spring fragrance, because I really want to hear from you guys. And then remember, I am going to be dropping my starting lineup and my spring lists coming up here soon. I'm not sure when exactly you're going to be seeing this video, so I don't want to give you a date or anything like that in specific, but it's going to be coming up because by the time you're seeing this, we probably will be in March. Starting lineup should be coming soon, and then the top 10 list will be following a couple weeks after that. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you tomorrow night with another one. Take care.